Apreciados amigos y amigas, qué alegría que estemos todos juntos aquí en la Iglesia de Todos los Santos. Dear friends, what a joy it is for us all to be together here at All Saints Church this morning. Mi nombre es Mike Kinman. My name is Mike Kinman, soy rector. I am the rector. Mi pronombres son él. My pronouns are he, him. This Sunday, we're back on Zoom. We're still on Zoom. With just an abundance of caution as the pandemic is still raging. We're hoping very shortly, maybe as soon as next week, we need to get the go-ahead from our resident, amazing epidemiologist, Dr. Nicole Gatto, for us to be back live streaming from the church with a small group of people in there. For now, we're on Zoom and grateful to be here and grateful that you all are a part of this. And the work of the church continues. Our Sunday food table was here this morning. Thanks so much to Erica, Corazon, Bob, and Corey. Gave out 48 lunches from Hope Kitchen and 75 masks. Deeply grateful for them and for everyone for supporting this work here. Also, when this pandemic started, we began to support some of the local organizations with which we have strong ties and started calling them our partners in love. Because that's who they are, and we want to ensure their good work continuing during these challenging times. Our partner in love this morning is the Trevor Project. Trevor Project is the leading national organization providing crisis intervention and suicide prevention services to lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and questioning young people under 25. Our own Kelly Aaron O'Phelan has been trained and works with Trevor Project here in Los Angeles. Trevor Project LA has been an amazing partner in love for us. So to make a gift to the Trevor Project, there's going to be a link going in the chat on Zoom, on Facebook, on YouTube. Please click and give as you can and give generously. Don't want to have any more time go by, so I want to get on to this morning's forum. We are thrilled to have with us Bishop Gene Robinson. And in thinking of how to introduce Gene, who is such a longtime friend of All Saints Church, really what occurs to me is the best way to introduce Gene is to say that Gene is a pastor. And I know that he is known for many things, and I don't feel the need to list them here. You probably know all of them. And at heart, he is a pastor. He loves people. When he was elected Bishop Diocesan of New Hampshire in 2003, that wasn't what people talked about, but it is what characterized his episcopate, his life before and his life since. He's a pastor, he loves people, he cares about people, he listens deeply to people, he speaks the truth in love to people about people, and he is a longtime friend of All Saints Church, and he has been a pastor to so many of us here. So I wish we could be doing this in person, and it is no less an honor to do this online. We welcome to the Rector's Forum and to All Saints Church Bishop Gene Robinson. Gene, welcome.
It's so great to be here, I can't tell you. And yes, it would be better to be there, but we'll take care of that once the pandemic is over. I'm so delighted to be with you. And let me just add my praise of the Trevor Project. It's been around for a good long while, and they really know what they're doing, and they do spectacular work. We know that a lot of LGBTQ people and those who are questioning whether they might be often are so isolated and so alone and trying to figure that out that they do contemplate suicide. And the Trevor Project gives them a voice on the other end of the phone to walk them through what they need to. So it really is deserving of your support, and I'm delighted to hear that you're doing that. So thanks, Mike. I'm delighted to be here.
Well, great, and especially grateful for you being here because I know you got your second COVID vaccine on Friday, and just like we're really trying to encourage people to get these vaccines when they come out. And I was wondering, can you just talk a little bit about that experience and why you think it's important to step up and get the vaccine?
Yeah, in the church, we have always talked about love your neighbor as yourself. And I think of getting the vaccine as one of the most tangible ways that we can love one another, because it's at least as much as it is for ourselves, it is for all those people with whom we come into contact. And so once you've got 2 of these shots, at least with the Pfizer and Moderna, vaccine, you protect yourself, but we know that until a certain percentage of us get those shots, we can still pass it on, it seems. So we have to continue the masking and social distancing and so on. But never have we had such a tangible way of showing our love for one another. So I really encourage you to do that.
Amen. Thank you. So let's start off by talking about last Sunday, which isn't what we thought we'd be talking about when we scheduled you being here, but here we are. So Randy Hollerith, Dean of Washington National Cathedral, invited into the cathedral pulpit Max Lucado, who's an evangelical pastor and an author. And in the past, he has compared same-sex marriage to legalized polygamy, bestiality, and incest, and suggested that homosexuality is something that can be changed by pastoral care. Both Dean Hollerith and Bishop Marianne Budde have since apologized for inviting Mr. Lucado and the pain it has caused to LGBTQ persons. Mr. Lucado has also issued an apology. At least as I read it, he isn't retracting his words or saying he was wrong. He's just saying he's sorry they hurt people. So while that's a step, it feels like there's still maybe some work to do there. Anyway, Dean Hollerith called you up before last Sunday and asked you to preside at Eucharist. And can you talk a little about that conversation and why you said yes, and what you said when you had a chance to speak last Sunday?
Sure. And let me just say in general, this is one of those things that it is like the proverbial diamond. When as you turn it, there are just all kinds of facets to be considered. And it's why we need everyone at the table, because each of us sees and understands different things in it. When you say he called me before Sunday, yes, just barely. I heard from Randy late Saturday morning, who had called just to talk about this, to tell me that there had been controversy and so on. And, you know, what did I think and what was the best way to move forward and so on. And then probably at, I don't know, 3:30 or 4 that same afternoon, he called again to ask for some advice and everything. And I think right in the middle of that phone call, he decided to ask me, because he was very apologetic about kind of wanting to draw me into this. So let me back up and just say, so I'm not on Facebook. Right. I understand that there are 3 accounts or pages or whatever it is attributed to me. And occasionally I hear that someone has written to me there and is appalled that I don't respond. I've never been on Facebook, and those 3 accounts are run by I have no idea whom, and I can't see them because I'm not on Facebook. So I was not aware of this controversy. Mm-hmm. And then I heard about it from Randy. And what he said was, I would feel really supported if you were to come and to preside at the service. And I think what was going on with him was, I think he knew that in some way he had, what shall I say, stepped in it. You know, he was in the middle of a controversy and a lot of negativity, as well as a lot of support where it was coming toward him. And I think he just wanted to remind people of the cathedral's commitment to LGBTQ people, and indicate that, or remind people of that by my presence. Now, I worked really closely with him, especially around the burial of Matthew Shepard's ashes, which we did in, I believe, it was 2018. And then in 2019, we dedicated a plaque to the memory of Matthew Shepard. And it's become quite a pilgrimage place for people who want to come and sit and meditate there and show their remembrance and respect for Matthew and the way in which he has spawned so much good work. His parents are amazing. So here's the other thing is, I'm a little embarrassed, but I've never heard of Max Lucado. I
Mhm.
literally, I had to Google him. I didn't know, right? And even when I Googled him, the thing that he wrote in 2004, which people found so offensive, and so did I once I saw it later. I just never heard of him. So I said yes to Randy because he has been incredibly out there for the LGBTQ community, and he's become a friend. And I didn't know what was kind of right or wrong in this controversy going on, but I wanted to be there to support him.
Mm-hmm.
So and I had not planned to speak. He didn't ask me to speak. And then when we last talked before the service, I said, I think I would like to say something. Would that be okay? So he introduced all of that at the beginning of the service. Mr. Lucado preached. And then just before the offertory, I said a couple of things. And one of the things that I said, which I think is true, although people would disagree about how we live this out, is that in seminary we're told that we are to be both prophet and priest, right? Prophet and pastor.
Pastor.
And those things are often in conflict. As a prophet, like Amos or any of the Jeremiah famous prophets, they speak truth to power. They tell people the things they don't want to hear in God's name and in the name of righteousness and justice. They're passionate about justice and pretty unbending and cranky, and difficult to be around because they tell you exactly what they see. And then on the other hand, a pastor is trying to put him or herself in the shoes of the person with whom they're meeting or talking or whatever, and seeking reconciliation. I think I said it during that time. I haven't listened to it since, but I said, we're in the business of reconciliation. Mm-hmm. And part of what I saw going on, I compared to what I do where I now work, which is Chautauqua Institution in far western New York. It's a 9-week summer program, and as the vice president of religion, one of my tasks is to invite 9 different preachers who are the preachers of the week. They preach at our what I call big church on Sunday, and then each morning at a more brief service, they offer a homily. And I bring up a wide spectrum of people there, including conservative evangelicals. And some of them are clearly not where I would want them to be in terms of their attitudes towards LGBTQ people. And in fact, I'm turned down by a number of them because they don't want to be in a place that I'm in charge of, right? So that was the sort of window into which I saw what was going on, at least from where I sat. And I wanted to affirm whatever part of this had to do with reconciliation. Now, Marianne and Randy have each written a long and careful. I don't mean careful in a bad sense, but I mean
full of care.
It seemed like they really gave a lot of care to it, and I think what they saw as their sin in this, if I can be say it that way, is that they failed to listen or to take as seriously as they might have the feedback they were getting about how painful this would be to some or many even in the LGBTQ community. And I encourage people to go to the website, either of the cathedral or of the Diocese of Washington, to read that, and also to read Max Lucado's statement. Now, to my way of thinking, he's a little late in getting to this asking for forgiveness. But what I understand now is that his standing is that we LGBTQ people are children of God and should be treated with respect and dignity and so on, as should our families. I thought it was really interesting that he included families in that and recognized those. Now, I think he still believes that marriage is between a man and a woman, and he's right to think that. And frankly, back in 2004, now this is the year right after I was consecrated, there were a lot of people who were talking about bestiality and polygamy and so on. I mean, he didn't really stand out, I don't think, in 2004, except he was a little nastier than some. But that was not an uncommon stance to have taken. What I wish is that this could have happened sooner. And I reminded those that I've talked with about this that, Barack Obama opposed gay marriage for his entire first term. Now, it was my privilege to know him a bit, and I know what was going on in his mind and heart, but publicly he was against it. And then when he finally did in 2015, or I think it was 2015, maybe a little sooner, publicly changed his mind about that, the word he used was evolved, and that he had evolved in his understanding and was now fully supportive. And I'll wind up by saying, I think that the question raised for me about this, far beyond this one instance, is how do we hold people accountable for what they have said and done? And for how long should we hold them accountable? And for how long should they pay for having thought that way at one time? Clearly, the key there is have they evolved? Have they changed their minds? And does that make further contact okay? It just seems to me that in this culture right now, and especially after the last 4 years we've had, people have increasingly gravitated towards black and white answers, and you're either one or you're the other, and forget about nuancing anything, right? And so it just raised for me how difficult the culture has become. And I just don't think this was an open and shut case in the sense that that we had we still have an opportunity for some kind of reconciliation here. And certainly we've all learned from this, none more than Randy and Marianne.
Well, and actually, I'd love to sort of dive into a couple of these issues and start with that one that you raised. I remember when we were talking earlier this week, you talked about this larger issue that's widespread in the culture about when is there a statute of limitations on some terrible thing you did or said, and does it all go away if and when you repent of that? And so, like, you're a bishop, you accepted a call to guard the faith and unity of the church, so reconciliation is kind of your jam. What do you think about that? What does your theology of reconciliation say? Are we a society that allows for absolution? And if you look at our sacrament of reconciliation, you don't just jump to absolution. You have self-examination, confession, reparation, and repentance, amendment of life, and then absolution. So like, how would you answer your own question in terms of how do we get to absolution and what is necessary? So if I say something, and I've said ignorant things my whole life, what do I need to do? And maybe particularly, and I'll sort of say this, our children's minister, Kelly Aaron O'Phelan, asked this question. She said, how do you think the Episcopal Church can repair the damage done historically to the LGBTQ community and continues to do to the LGBTQ community, particularly trans folks and LGBTQ folks of color? What sort of reparations can the Episcopal Church make to perhaps put our money where our mouth is? So how do we sort of wade into that?
Well, I'm so glad you decided to ask me simple questions this Sunday. So I think I think they are all the right questions. And I will just point out that there would be a lot of people who would maintain that I didn't preserve the faith, right?
Sorry.
By
Yes.
becoming a self-affirming, proud, out and gay man and supportive of gay marriage and all of that. Preserving the faith is in the eye of the beholder, right? And so we'll start there. That not everyone would agree that I have remotely done that. I happen to believe that God is still revealing God's self, right? And that we got a lot of things wrong. Both sides in the Civil War quoted scripture to oppose or to affirm slavery. And so we have to be very, very careful. And so LGBTQ people are not the only ones that we owe reparations to. I think this amendment of life can take as many forms as there are people, but it needs to be sacrificial. It needs to cost something. Sometimes it costs money. Sometimes it costs time, and sometimes it costs us whatever happens when we realize and then own up to having been wrong. And so you introduced me as a pastor. So my mind immediately goes to that. What can we do? I think Susan Russell's new title has something to do with reaching across the divide or bridging
engagement across difference.
Yeah, engagement across difference. Lord knows there's enough of that around, right? There's enough. It just seems to me that we have vast gulfs between all kinds of groups of people, and good grief. What about this week between, on the vote on impeachment? There's a gulf right there that I've begun to think is even as hopeful and positive as I am, is maybe impossible to breach. I just don't know. So what I would say is around our community, around especially African American community, as a people of color in general, but especially those human beings that those of us who are white enslaved, right? And to my way of thinking, it's the great issue that faces us. Race is, and I know at Chautauqua we raise this all the time, and it's hardest to raise among those who are really nice people and they're liberal. They've never been bad to any person of color, and therefore think they're not racist. But the fact of the matter is, the world has been set up to benefit those of us who are white at the expense of those who aren't. And I don't have to do anything to participate in that racism. All I have to do is get up, put my feet on the floor and walk around, and I'm benefiting from it. So it takes, whether you're speaking about race or LGBT or whatever, it takes an enormous amount of intention and willingness to open oneself to learning new things, to seeing new things. Later this morning, I'm going to be preaching on the Transfiguration. And one of the things that occurred to me working on this sermon in light of what happened last Sunday is that one of the things that happens in the story of the Transfiguration is that Peter, James, and John, the disciples that Jesus takes with him up to the mountain, sees things as they really are for the first time. They see Jesus as more than an itinerant preacher from Nazareth. They see him as the Son of God. And he is flanked by representatives of the law and the prophets, Moses and Elijah. And And so once they've seen that, they can't ever unsee it. And I think that's what this work, whether it be, the work of last Sunday or the work of anti-racism or whatever, is to be brave enough to allow the reality of things to be revealed to us, and not so defensive that we fight off seeing what we've not seen before. And then once you've seen it, you can't unsee it. And people of goodwill, and certainly religious people, should seek to amend not only my life, but our corporate life. And the church ought to be the headlights in that journey, not the taillights.
Right. And I mean, reconciliation is supposed to be the central mission of the church as Christ has given it to us. I've unwittingly just given a really good example of how we wound each other, which is in asking Kelly Aaron's question. I misgendered them, and I didn't even know I was doing it until Nina Scherer, our youth minister, put something in the chat that said, I misgendered Kelly Aaron. Kelly Aaron goes by they, them. And so, I know I am capable absolutely of wounding without meaning it. And that doesn't make it any less wounding.
Right.
And so, part of what I'm learning about repentance and reparation is it's not up to me as the person who wounds to decide how big a deal something is. It is up to me to say, wow, I did this. And Kelly Aaron, I am deeply sorry for misgendering you, although I know you're with parent culture right now. But I'm deeply sorry for the pain that caused. And this gets into sort of the intersectionality piece that you talked about, which is, can we listen deeply to those we have wounded and ask them, what does it take to repair the breach?
Yeah, in cases of harassment, it's not the one accused of harassment who gets to define it.
Right.
It's the person who's been on the receiving end of it. And that's part of what I mean about like opening oneself to see it, something that you've not seen before. And what I think it takes is exactly what you said, which is to listen to them. And then I would say, believe them. That is to say, believe that is their reality. And then, you can talk, and you'll probably have to talk to make good on that relationship. But it's offering that person the dignity of being able to define their own reality. And white people for far too long, for instance, around race, have or heterosexual people in this case, or a binary people in this case, have far too long not respected, not listened to, not seen what was happening.
So one of the things that strikes me is like you articulated, you really felt a need to stand with Randy Hollerith because the strong ally he and Washington National Cathedral have been to you personally, to the cause for LGBTQ full equality in the Episcopal Church. And that's been a somewhat controversial stand. It's highlighted something that's not a new tendency, but is certainly a growing tendency for allied groups to fracture when there's disagreement over an action or a statement or a tactic. You mentioned Susan Russell's work of Canon for Engagement Across Difference. Here's a question that Susan asked us to kick around, which is, how do we engage across difference with our allies when we have a common goal? And then we have an event like this that ends up becoming an obstacle and wounds people. How do we model how we stay together as a movement when we have these differences? And not just neither do the circular firing squad, but also don't ignore what just happened. What do you think? Because you've been in the middle of this for not just this week, for a long time.
Right. So let me start out with what I think the spiritual discipline is that undergirds reconciliation, which is and this is what I lived through in 2003 and the years since, and had 2.5 years of daily death threats and so on.
Mm-hmm.
The spiritual discipline underneath all of that, and not hating those who hate you, is being so sure of God's love for me that I don't have to be unglued by the hate coming my way. So that's one thing, is doing the spiritual work of being assured of God's love for me no matter what. Because I think that gives us the wherewithal to do some brave things, like listen to someone else, like hearing what their reality is and believing it. The second part of that is, it seems to me that when we have these conversations among allies, really, right? I mean, is to at least figuratively, if not actually, begin the conversation by saying, just remember, as I'm about to say some tough things, I really do love you.
Yeah.
But you know, because I love you, I'm going to say some difficult things. I think you got that all wrong. And it seems to me that Jesus doesn't say we won't have enemies, or Jesus doesn't say that reconciliation is about agreeing with our enemies. Jesus, nor are we called upon to like them. We are called upon to love them. And what I believe that means is that when we fight with them over the things about which we disagree, we don't hit them below the belt. We don't attack their humanity. We don't attack their dignity in our disagreement. And I think what we have seen in the last 4 years, and what has become, it seems, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like we're having a pandemic of a free-for-all, that there's just nothing you won't say in pursuit of winning the current discussion. And if that includes tearing someone's dignity apart, then so be it. And somehow we have got to pull back from that precipice, because it makes for a nasty world. So I think somehow if we can keep reminding ourselves and reminding the people that we're having this argument with, that at the end of the day, I'm still going to love you, but part of loving you is to tell you what I really see going on.
Yeah, well, and then like you live in Washington, D.C., so you've talked about the last 4 years. First of all, like sort of, wow, what that's been like. I mean, last week when we were talking, you mentioned it as sort of living under occupation.
Yeah.
So can you talk about what that's like? And also, like, what do you see as a road forward over this? I mean, this divisiveness has deep historical roots, and can we envision a new idea of being a public citizen? And what does that look like, and how do we get there? Again, easy question, but go ahead.
Yeah, it seems to me that one of the best ways of the church to be present in the world is to A, embody that, and B, call the world to that. Not because it says that in the Bible, but because it's the right thing to be. We might do it for religious reasons, but when we go into the public square, we argue that on the basis of the Constitution and so on. So being here in DC, it's been amazing. I've never lived in an occupied city. Now I have to say, it was comforting to have the National Guard here during the inauguration, after what happened on January 6th. And I spent most of the day on January 6th crying. I was glued to the television, and I just pretty much wept through the whole thing. It seemed so destructive, and the logical end of what we're talking about, right? If there's no holds barred, then that's how it ends. it ends in death for some and injury for many, many more, and disruption and so on. So we here in the city, I think, probably took it even more personally. You can live in Washington, D.C. and kind of be separated from politics, just like you can anywhere else. But there is a sense in which this is our city, right? We already have an inferiority complex. We have no voting membership in Congress, even though we have a larger population than 2 states. And our mayor could not call out the National Guard to help without permission from the Pentagon, because all of our decisions can be undone, or all of the decisions must be made by people in Congress or in the federal government. So it reawakened in us the ways in which we don't measure up. We like Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands and Guam and so on. Let me at least say something good. I spent all day inauguration day crying too, but for the opposite reason. I have to say, I feel like all of inauguration day was pitch perfect. It is what we needed to hear and see. It was all about the American people and not the person being elected president and the person being elected vice president. But how delightful to see those 2 people with their spouses saying very little at the memorial for all of those who had died of COVID. We have gotten so used to filling up every moment and not letting there be silence. I thought the silence that the evening before at that memorial was so powerful, not to mention the image of those lights going up to what I think is the most sacred place in all of DC, which is the Lincoln Memorial. And then the next day, everything from to see those who spoke reflective of the culture, like all of the culture, to watch that young Black woman become a superstar in front of our very own eyes. Of course, she was a superstar beforehand, but we all got to know her when she read her poetry at age, I don't know, 22. Makes me feel like I sloughed off most of my life. I just felt that was so great, and how wonderful that the new president and vice president worked all afternoon, doing things that the president and the vice president do. How lovely to see that. And then I'll just, while we feel like we've taken it on the chin here in Washington, D.C., that night, I'm watching like everyone else, and that wonderful show with all of the entertainers, and then the fireworks started. Nobody here knew there were going to be fireworks, and I'm watching them, and they are like the best fireworks I've seen in I can't remember when. And then I realized I could see them live.
Yeah.
And I went out on my balcony and looked down 14th Street, and I could see them. And it made my heart sing. It felt like we were going to be okay again. What that reminds me of something else that I've been feeling lately. I'm fearful with this COVID thing. You know how often people say, I just want things to get back to normal. I actually don't. And I am fearful that we're going to make an idol of normal or the way they used to be, and not remember what we have learned when we have seen poor communities and communities of color get more of the of the virus and less of the vaccine.
Mm-hmm.
We had just a powerful experience of Black Lives Matter movement here in DC, ultimately resulting in a full intersection and street there being named Black Lives Matter Plaza, which is no small thing here in DC. Mm-hmm. Everybody uses that name for it. I love that.
That's great.
It caught on immediately, and but you know, does getting back to normal mean forgetting all that and what we might have seen for the first time? It felt to me like a lot of white people for the first time ever saw what was meant when we talked about systemic or institutional racism versus just being a hatefully racist person. Mm-hmm. And I'm fearful that looking forward to normal means going back to the way we were. It's a little like, you know, saying to an African American, you know, weren't things great at Tara? You know, the mansion and Gone with the Wind. No, they weren't. They were for a few people, mm-hmm. but for everyone else, they were horrible. Yeah. So I'm fearful that we're all going to make an idol of normal.
So in trying not to do that and in moving forward, like you talked about the tension between prophet and pastor, which I'm like deeply aware of, and that resonates with me. There's another tension as we are, you know, all of us are called to be public theologians. I am reminded that Dr. King said both the arc of the moral universe is long and it bends towards justice, and he also said justice delayed is justice denied. You know, you said last week at National Cathedral, you know, that we've won. And you meant that eschatologically, you know, the outcome has been determined, and then also said, and there's also a lot of work to do. So how do we, as all of us, not just as clergy, as public theologians, people who are trying to live our lives theologically in public, how do we hold that tension? And I struggle with this, between a sure and certain hope that yes, the end is determined and it is justice, and that immediacy of yes, justice delayed is justice denied, because we're talking about the lives of real people. How do you do that in your life, and how can we do that as a people?
Yeah, it's a great conversation to have. I think for me, the knowing that at the end of the day, love wins, God mm-hmm. wins, that I never expect to see that in my lifetime. I expect there always to be work to be done, but knowing that that's how it ends empowers me to do the work I need to do now. And it helps me be resilient enough to withstand setbacks, even serious setbacks. You know, I think back to the Civil Rights Museum in Memphis, Tennessee, mm-hmm. At the old Lorraine Hotel, which looks just exactly the way it did when Dr. King was shot there. And when you go in the front doors there is a big black monolith of, I don't know, granite, some sort of black stone. And carved into that stone is an ever upwardly moving line of African-American people. And every single one of them is either standing on the shoulders of or holding the hands of someone else. Mm-hmm. And the thing that I find so inspiring about that is none of those people on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, or none of those people in that civil rights movement ever expected that in their lifetimes they would achieve the justice they were seeking, mm-hmm. that it was enough to be in the march, and that the only way they could stay resilient was was to count on one another and count on that vision of where ultimately it's going to go. And and when I think about Dr. King, everybody loves "I Have a Dream," and everybody quotes it, and everybody's got it on a poster somewhere, in their house or school or whatever. What they don't quote are the last 2 or 3 years of his life, when he linked racism with militarism, with poverty. Because so he went from
3 evils.
So the dream is the eschatological thing. This is how it's going to end. I have a dream. But the work to be done now is to see all of those connections, and the ways in which they conspire to make the world benefit one group at the expense of another. And so I think part of the church's role, be it clergy or laity, is to point to that tension, and to be empowered by believing we know how it ends, because that's what I believe in my own community. I suspect it's true in communities of color and in all sorts of respects, that we stay resilient and we stay in the struggle, because even if we have setbacks, we know that ultimately love wins.
That actually, amen. That leads to a question that this came up in the Q&A, and you can put your all questions in the Q&A. Joseph asked, does the very understanding of church need to change in a time when God is clearly revealing herself in new ways? What most urgently needs to change in our self-understanding and practice as a church?
Wow. So thanks, Joseph, for that. So my first answer is, the church always needs to change. I don't care when you ask that question, the answer is yes. Of course, the hard part is how, and how do we get there? I think the church, we're fairly used to proclaiming things, and we're not nearly so good at learning things. When I became a bishop, I stopped preaching in pulpits. It just seemed to me that bishops far too often preach down to people or talk down to them. And at the very least, I could talk with a congregation rather than at it. And so I guess one of the things, Joseph, that I would say about the way the church needs changing would be to do a whole lot more listening and a whole lot less talking. Says the guy right now who's talking a mile a minute. So that's always hard. I'm reminded of the story in when the Israelites they've left, they've escaped Egypt, they've come through the Red Sea, and now they're in the desert. They thought it was going to be the promised land just on the other side, but no, it was the desert. And they're in the desert, and they are they're grousing about they're remembering the garlic they got to flavor things back in Egypt and wishing they were back there. And Moses and Yahweh, God, is not happy. They are not happy. And so Moses says, I can't do this by myself. I cannot carry this kind of a burden. So God says, I will give you some help. So a certain number of elders are called in to a council, and the blessing and the authority that is on Moses is now shared with them, right? They get pieces of it. And while they are sitting as this new council almost for God, word comes from some tattletale that there are two guys, Eldad and Medad, back in the camp, who are prophesying like they got some of this authority as well. And as any institution will do, they wanted to shut it down because they wanted to control God, and they wanted to control who got this authority. And what they learned was that God will not be bound in that way. God will not be fenced in that way. And God is going to get God's work and God's justice done with or without the church. And so, Joseph, one of the ways I think the church needs to change is to recognize the LDads and MEDads out beyond the church who are actually doing God's will without our permission and not under our control. And we could learn something from them. And so I think that the church could get a little less clingy to power and recognize God acting outside the church and join God there.
That's good. Another question from Michael Birch. I think this one's actually more directed at me. Says, if engagement across difference is what All Saints believes, why has Trump been consistently demonized here with the resultant pre-COVID precipitous decline in congregation? I think there's a whole bunch of issues going on there, and that's great. Thanks for asking the question, Michael. What I would say is, I think what we have tried to do, and I can just speak for me, what I have tried to do is never to demonize an individual. And there are policies and actions that are demonic because they target and they wound the people of God. That's a hard distinction. Sometimes it's hard for me to make, sometimes it's hard to communicate. Bishop, I'm wondering sort of how in your experience with this, how do you distinguish between, certainly the phrase, hate the sin, love the sinner has been weaponized to a great degree against the LGBTQ community. How do we make that distinction between someone who may be a incredibly misguided image of God, but still an image of God, and actions that don't honor that, actions that are demonic? How have you experienced this?
Yeah, so that's part of what I meant when I talked about not hitting below the belt. That loving your enemies is not agreeing with them or liking them, but treating them like the child of God they are. And even though you may dislike them mightily, I would say it is hard, and the danger is that you slip from criticizing a policy into tearing apart the person. And I think we all stand in close proximity to that particular sin. But I don't think we can ever be explicit enough about that separation. And just as I mentioned, I think at the beginning of a difficult conversation, I might do well to remind you that I love you as the child of God you are. I'm about to say some really, hard things. And so something like that in this, I'm talking about the policies that seem to me to be negative and wounding and dangerous and so on. And I don't know why this child of God is for those policies, but I, for one, am going to work against those policies. Something of that sort. But I think it's just a constant thing. And I think I think generally speaking, that's called an ad hominem argument, right?
Right.
You stop attacking the thing and you attack the person who said it. And that's the kind of divide that I think we have to be, really careful of. It seems to me that much of the last 4 years, has been an ad hominem existence for us, increasingly so. And somehow it came to it was in fashion, and it ought never to be in fashion. So I think once we've gotten this far down this road, it will be hard working ourselves back to that kind of self-discipline.
Yeah. So we can go for another 15 minutes. I want to check and see how you're doing. Do you have another 15 minutes that you can spend with us?
I'm good. I took enough time. Yeah.
Okay.
My fever's back. My COVID shot, but I'm good.
Okay. I just wanted to check in about that. So, because we're getting some really good questions here. Mary Bush says that Bishop Robinson started out, let me see if I can cut this one down a little bit. What I'd like to hear in addition, what do we do about having the Episcopal Church and All Saints here truly recognize the damage, I will say, we have done and continue to do to LGBTQ people, African Americans, people of color, including the indigenous people on whose land we live and whose languages and cultures and families were destroyed by forced Christianity. Of course, we need to talk. How do we address these same issues within the church itself? It seems we fail to open our eyes to the damage institutions we love and worship in have done and still do. Again, I guess that gets back to sort of the reparation question from an intersectional standpoint. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think serious talk of reparations to the African American community has finally begun, but it is still in its infancy, and it's a conversation that needs to happen. It is part of our holding ourselves accountable for what our forebears did. And what I'm less sure about is, because that one seems pretty clear to me. And if it's that hard to talk about reparations for something so clear, that the kind of price that is still being paid for that kind of treatment for 400 years, 300 of which, involved slavery, and the rest of it near slavery. It's less clear to me how to talk about reparations in terms of the LGBTQ community, the indigenous peoples on whose land we are. The first time I spoke in Australia, I was astounded that there was not a single public meeting of anything, any kind, about any topic by any organization that didn't acknowledge the land on which we were and whose it was before we took it, and paying our respects and honoring their ancestors. There was something kind of like unrelenting about it, right? Is to commit yourself to saying that in every situation at every public gathering. Another example of reparations that's not about money is, for anyone who's been to Germany and particularly Berlin, you notice these little plates on I don't know if they're stars or squares or whatever, but these sort of plates that have been embedded in the concrete sidewalks at the site of homes where there were Jews who were sent to the death camps. And in some locations, there's just a huge host of them, and they are everywhere. You can't go anywhere without being reminded of it. And it seems to me it's no, it doesn't erase the Holocaust, for crying out loud, but it is a constant reminder of something that a lot of people would like to let's just move beyond this, right? That was a long time ago. Let's just move beyond this. Well, no, let's not just move beyond this. Let's figure out a way as part of our holding ourselves accountable to be reminded of it on a daily basis. And so I think that's one way, for God's sake, we still we still celebrate Columbus Day.
Mm-hmm.
Good Lord. So to be mindful, to be made mindful by these constant remembrances, that without paying attention and without careful planning, we will move beyond it without having settled it at all. We're struggling with this at Chautauqua, where the Seneca Nation has a community right near us, and the name Chautauqua is an Indian word, and so we're struggling with the whole land acknowledgement issue, about what should be said, how should it be said. A lot of our speakers who come in do that. But I've never seen any place do it with the consistency and seriousness with which Australia does it.
Well, it's interesting because it's a fraught question, because like we're exploring this right now at All Saints. We're gathering a group to look at the history of the land that we're on, and I've heard both people say land acknowledgement is crucial, and then I've heard other people say, well, land acknowledgement is just sort of a way of you trying to absolve yourself. And I'm reminded of, I was at a dinner once back when I was in St. Louis, and I was at a table with a tribal elder from the Osage Nation, and the conversation turned to this whole idea of reparations, and how can we give the nation what it's owed for the land they once owned. And this elder, looked at me and said, "You still don't get it. You think it's about money and ownership. It's like, we never owned the land. You don't own the land."
Right.
And so it's like, stop thinking about how you can reimburse us from what you took for us. It's like, ownership is your deal. That's not us. We recognize that no one owns the land. So can we talk about that? And it started this really interesting conversation about, well, what would it look like, to get out of sort of this capitalist transactional mindset of, okay, oh yeah, we stole this from you, what would the reparation be? To say, oh wow, what you're saying is the land is gift to all of us. Can we return to that place where we acknowledge that the land is gift to all of us? Mm-hmm. And yet then what we'd have to let go of then is our own thinking, our own economic system. Right. And that's far more in many ways, reparations, that's where you can say reparations and say, okay, well, isn't that just you writing a check for absolution?
Right. And even worse than giving up those things is giving up control.
Yes.
Assume that ownership implies and imbues control, and that's the worst thing of all to give up.
Yeah.
So I think the trick here for us in the next period of time is to enter this discussion about, generally speaking, and I wish there were a different word than reparations, because it has so become associated with writing a check, and that's all about money. It's not about not about money as right. Well, but it's not all about money. Mm-hmm. And I think we're so unused to this topic that somehow we need to give one another the space to try out saying things. This is where the criticism of one another can be so destructive. It shuts down the kind of exploratory language. Mm-hmm. At least for me, as a dyed-in-the-wool extrovert, I don't know what I'm thinking until I say it. Right? Yeah. You're here for the first time, and so am I.
Right.
The thing I admire about introverts so much is that they figure out exactly what it is they are thinking, and then they say it. But I get to what I'm thinking by right. trying to say it. And I think in a discussion like this that has just so many pitfalls and so many ways it can go awry, that somehow we need to be a little more generous with one another in trying to get to what this might mean. I love the indigenous person that you mentioned at this thing to share that with you. I mean, what a gift that was, right?
Right.
And you will never look at it the same again because you had that experience. And so I think a generosity of spirit and a little humility goes a long way.
Yes.
Right. I mean, and a little humility is so rare in today's world. It's like a heap of humility. If we could just go into these discussions ready to learn rather than to promulgate and proclaim, we would be a lot better off. I wish we could get into those conversations before we have got it all figured out.
Amen. Donnie asks, and this is interesting, he says, has our growing understanding of gender led us to the point where we might refer to God not as he, she, but they, them? I'll hear your answer. I know Dr. Will Gaffney has an answer to this too. So what do you think?
I don't know her answer. So so my inclination is to say, yes, I like the they, them. And I know for the trans community and the non-binary community, especially, I've just learned so much from them about this, and how having having a set number of boxes into which we stuff people, whether they fit or not, does violence to them, right? And one of the things that I so admire about the non-binary community is that they refuse to allow themselves to be put into one of those boxes. And so if we're willing to do that for human beings, which are finite, surely we could do that with God, who is infinite. I mean, if there's a them anywhere, it would be God. Right. And so I like that idea. I think we have to work out monotheism and them, they, but we can do that. I don't know exactly how, but we can do that. And I know we do it. I know my friends who prefer they, them, and theirs, as awkward as it is, every time it's awkward for me, I remember, right? I remember why this person is doing this and what their life has been like before they could do such a thing. And so if we struggle with God using plural pronouns, then good.
Yep.
That's a chance for us to be reminded. At the moment, I'm stuck saying God 12 times in a sentence to avoid saying he or she, or her or him, because I think God is, beyond gender and all genders. So it's a great question, and it would be interesting to try to put together a service doing that and just seeing what it felt like.
It is, and as Sally Howard mentioned in the text that she's used they, them for God in sermons. I have on occasion. I mentioned Dr. Gaffney because we're using her woman's lectionary this year. And this actually came up. She was here as a scholar in residence while she was putting the lectionary together. And this was a question that came up. And again, I think it's one of these both and things. part of her answer was, yes, that's appropriate to do that. Certainly as a Trinitarian, that's appropriate to do that, to say God is they. That's probably the most appropriate pronoun. And her point was that the male imagery for God and our male associations with God are so powerful and pervasive that if we say they, we still have he as an image in our head. And that we need to actually use she as a way of dismantling the male imagery before we're able to move on to they. And I thought, that has stuck with me. And again, sort of as a both and so I try to use she and then sprinkle in the they. So
that's really long view, isn't it?
Yeah. And so it's, I love it when I can listen to brilliant people, because I usually try to learn something. So
Yes.
we've got like no time left. We could go on forever. And I also know that you just need to lie down and get some rest. And so thank you for coming on anyway. Want to have you back more to talk about Chautauqua and the work that you do there. We didn't really get to that enough, and I apologize for that. We have so many questions that are unanswered. Definitely want you to come. And will you come be here in person with us when we can travel?
Nothing better.
Okay. Any words of wisdom you'd like to leave us with, or even something to make us smile?
Well, just this, even though we're kind of all shut down and everybody is at home and we're not gathering, All Saints Pasadena continues to be a beacon of light and hope to the world, certainly to the Episcopal Church. I love you beyond belief, and I count on you to call me to be my best self, and I think call the church to be its best self. So don't stop doing that. We count on you and love you for that. And you probably have no idea how important you are to all of us.
Well, and thank you so much. We'll receive that, and we'll also send that right back to you in the way that you call us to be our best selves, that you give us a model for living and loving Christ's love in incredibly powerful ways, and just always, always deeply grateful for you and for the friendship that we share. So Bishop Gene Robinson, thank you so much for being with us. Can't wait to hear you preach at the 11:15 and the 1 p.m. And grateful that you pre-recorded so that you can go get some rest. So please feel better.
Thank you for that.
Okay. Love.
Thank you. Bye-bye.